Back. Once again, this is Adrian from Framework Tutoring, and thank you so much for tuning into today's video. So, today we're just going to go over an introduction to the reading section of the SAT. So, for the first week of this course, basically what we're going to do is we're just going to go over all of the different types and sections in the SAT and a little bit of general strategies. It's going to be starting the second week that we actually get into these passages and analyze them. If you're already comfortable or you know how these passages work, I would still recommend you watch parts of this section because there's some valuable tips. But if you feel like you're already comfortable, feel free to skip to week 2 and get started on the SAT a little bit earlier. But these are mainly for people who don't really have any knowledge on the SAT and don't know what's on it. All right, let's get started. So, quick table of contents. We're going to go over overview, organization, question types, and what you can expect on this section. Okay, overview. So I mentioned a little bit about this in my first video, but the SAT reading section is the first part of your exam, and it involves 52 questions in 4 passages, which you must finish in 65 minutes. So each passage is 500 to 750 words, and you have about 1 minute and 50 seconds per question, including the passage if you calculate around the time you have. So the passages are based on a variety of topics, and they sometimes contain a graphic or a couple graphics. So it might show a table, a graph, anything that asks you to analyze data. And each passage will have 10 to 11 questions. Okay, so the structure of the reading section. So there's 3 main types of passages that the SAT reading section will test you on. The first is fiction, the second is history and social science, and the third is science. So fiction passages are always the first passage in the reading section. This means that they aren't from the real world, they are a story made up by an author, and they'll usually feature works that are either from America or some other country across the globe. These works are a little bit stylistically different than most other passages on the SAT, which we'll go over during our actual lessons, but just know that the first passage on the SAT is always a fiction one. After that, it gets a little bit murky. There isn't a set order, but these are the 2 types of passages you 100% will get. The second is the history/social sciences passage. These will either present a historical document or an experiment regarding a social phenomena. So by a historical document, I mean like a document that was written like hundreds of years ago. So something like the Declaration of Independence. And by an experiment, I literally mean an experiment. There's going to be a paper or I guess an analysis of a lab, the results, and maybe even like what it means compared to another study, but it'll go over something related to the social sciences. And the third type of passage is pretty similar to the social sciences passage, but except it's tested on science. So it can test you on biology, chemistry, any other science topics. Most people say that the science passage is the easiest type of SAT passage, but just know that these are the 3 things that they'll test you on. All right, so question types. There's a couple of main types of questions on the SAT. The first is command of evidence, the second is words and context, and the third is analysis. So command of evidence pairs 2 questions on the SAT. I personally call these questions dual questions because they come in 2. So one question, which is the first question, will provide an answer, and the other will provide evidence to support it. Once we actually get into the SAT and like actual questions, I'll definitely make sure to point out this type of question because it's really important. The second is words and context questions. These questions will ask you about the meaning of a word in the context of a passage. So for example, an SAT might say, in line 56, the word quaint most nearly means, or something like that, and then it'll give you 4 options of words that you can say it's similar to. The third type of question is called analysis questions. These questions just ask you to analyze a specific part of the passage or the overall passage. And one more note, there's one dual passage on the SAT. This means that it's not just going to be one passage you're reading, you'll have 2 slightly shorter passages and you'll have 10 to 11 questions to answer on those 2 passages. The reason the dual passage is a little bit more unique, it doesn't just ask about one passage or the other, it'll ask you to compare the 2 passages at the end. All right. Now, the final slide for today, we'll be looking at some general strategies. The first general strategy is don't be scared to skip around. Now, I'm not saying that you should go from one passage, answer 5 questions, then move on to another passage to answer 5 questions, and then come back and answer the 5 from the first one. In fact, I'm saying the exact opposite. You should do one passage at a time. But what I am trying to say is that you don't have to start off with the first passage that they give you. A lot of people struggle with the fiction passage because it takes a bit of time for your brain to get running when you're taking the SAT. When you're about to take the test and you open it, you have a lot of nerves going through you, it's harder to think, and that first question that you see can really impact your mentality during the entire test. So if you feel comfortable during the fiction section, definitely do that one first. But if you feel less comfortable on the fiction and you like a science passage more, then just skip the first passage until you find one that you feel comfortable with and then start on that one. Just make sure not to forget to answer the other passage once you get started. The second is chronological order. For the most part, the questions on the reading passage are in chronological order. Now, this isn't always true, but in a lot of times it is. But what do I mean by chronologically? Well, it means that from questions 1 to 10, if question 1 gives you a certain line range, then the other questions preceding it will most likely ask you about information that is beyond that first question's range. So, to give you an example, let's say question 5 on one of my reading sections asks you about paragraph 5, and question 7 asks you about paragraph 7. Then that means that then that means that the answer for question 6 will probably be in between paragraph 5 and paragraph 7. This isn't always true, but it's something that it's good to keep in mind, because if you are just so stuck on a question and you have no idea where to look, sometimes you can use context clues and chronological order to find a place to look and discover that answer. The final thing is questions, then passage. There's a specific formula for this that I'm going to talk about during my lesson, but do not start reading the passage before you mark it up with the questions. Analyze the questions first. Now, this is something that kind of comes to a shock of a lot of people that I first teach the SAT to. I mean, why would you read the questions when you don't even know what the passage is about? Here's the logic that I used and the logic that I was taught from people who helped me on the SAT. Something that a lot of people struggle with, especially on the reading section, is they'll read the passage one time through, then they'll go to the question, and when a question asks you about paragraph 5, you have no idea what paragraph 5 said because you don't have a photographic memory. So you end up having to go back and read that passage and then go back and answer the question, but sometimes you'll forget, so you have to go and read it again, and boom, time's up and you can't answer your questions. I just don't think that this inefficient use of time can help you get a good score. So what I'm going to teach you how to do next week is to scan each of the questions in the SAT as quick as possible. This entire process should take you 1 to 2 minutes at most. Then use those questions and the lines given to mark up your text so that you can answer most of the questions that the lines are given for on your first reading. This kind of helps you, I guess, not get overwhelmed by the text or get caught up in the tricks that College Board likes to use. All right. And that's it for today's video. Once again, thank you so much for watching and being part of the Framework experience. If you have any questions, feel free to contact me anytime, and see you next time.